if you did not remember anything about your past at all, any of the experiences you've had, anything you've done, your successes or your failures, if all of that was completely gone, starting tomorrow, how would you choose to live your life?
Sometimes you're in the river of success and prosperity and everything's going positive, and sometimes you're in the river of adversity and, let's say, failure. But both these rivers are parallel to each other. They're flowing to the same ocean of progress.
He said, well, I realized if I removed myself from the game, it would be the same as removing one of the threads from the tapestry. And so then it would take some time for the tapestry to reorganize itself, to rebuild all of the connections. And that would cause a delay in the perfection of the universe. And I said to my friend, how long do you think you not coming back would have delayed the perfection of the universe? And he said to me,
welcome back to the Acceptance of Life podcast. And today we are going to talk about surrender. And this is a very, very deep subject. So I'm hoping to get some fantastic insights. Fajan, you are still in India at the moment. Welcome.
I am, yes. I'm in a totally different part of India, and the monsoon has just arrived. So it's incredibly wet and rainy outside, but inside it is delightful and ready for a beautiful podcast.
Yes, wonderful. Just want to warn, if you're watching, the power can cut in India sometimes, where you are right now, but we'll just continue. So you'll see a little bit of a darkened screen when that happens, but it's just brief moments. So we'll just continue with that. It makes it a little bit more interesting, and we'll surrender. We'll surrender to that experience.
Exactly. That is part of the reality I'm experiencing here. So let us not try and edit that out.
Fantastic. So I would propose that we start with a text or an essay of Sri Chinmoy that speaks about surrender. Sri Chinmoy wrote a lot about this particular quality and saw it as one of the highest achievements in the spiritual life. To achieve real surrender is a process that takes years and can take a lifetime or lifetimes. And I wanted to start by reading out a paragraph each time, and we can then discuss it and go into the depths a little bit further, if that's okay with you.
Wonderful. I'm all on board for that.
Super. So I'll just start with, this is by Sri Chinmoy. Surrender knows that there is a guiding hand and feels that this guiding hand is ever present. This hand may strike or bless the aspirant. The surrendered aspirant has discovered the truth that whatever comes from the Supreme is always fruitful of good and light. And so what I found interesting about this first paragraph, of course, surrender, we feel there's a guiding hand, that we are guided by a divine intelligence, a divine flow. But Sri Chinmoy says here, this hand may strike or bless the aspirant, the seeker. And this is interesting about surrender, that sometimes, if you surrender, life goes very well for you. You have, you're experiencing prosperity. But sometimes when you surrender, you may also experience, like, say, the hand that strikes you. Yeah? You may experience adversity. But if you're truly surrendered, then I think you take both adversity and prosperity equally, like with equanimity.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think what you're talking about there is what you're really aiming for in that state is unconditional surrender. So someone who is conditionally surrendered, they're going to be able to surrender their will as long as the results are the results that they were originally wanting. And as soon as things start going the other way, or they start having different types of experiences, that will cause them to resist and rebel against that surrender. But I think the highest and the deepest form of surrender, in that you really realize that if you are giving yourself fully to the experience of life for the highest manifestation and the highest ideals in life, that whatever experience you're given is the right experience for you to have, and it's the necessary experience to expedite your progress, because sometimes very negative experiences in the short term can have outstanding results in the long term. And it's having faith in the process in the short term that's really important, that knowing that it's like we've talked about before, that great question. You have to decide at some point in life whether you believe you live in a friendly or a hostile universe. So if you're still on the fence about that and you start having negative experiences, obviously you'll start to question and you might start tending towards thinking that perhaps you do live in a hostile universe. But if you have truly taken that step of committing to the ideal that you live in a friendly universe and that the universe wants to see your full flourishing and it wants to see you succeed, not in the way you think you should succeed, but in the way that it's going to be most fulfilling, then you can
Exactly.
really,
And so sometimes the universe needs to give us experiences of failure, of setback, of adversity. And it's still a friendly universe, but it feels that sometimes this is necessary for our growth. Like you
yeah,
say, crises are sometimes necessary. And I think it was Churchill who said, never waste a good crisis. You can make so
yeah.
much progress in the crisis, right?
Yeah, because what you want to think is the experiences you have are the fuel for your life. So for your spiritual life, the experiences in some way, they're like the fuel or the type of matter, let's say, even though they're experiences, so they're not physical, but they're the type of matter that provide fuel and energy for your spiritual life. So whether you're having really good experiences or really bad experiences, either of those are going to provide tremendous energy, and they're going to provide a real push forward in your spiritual life. And so that's what you want to think. You actually want to see it as a real blessing. And I know I've got a couple of spiritual brothers who have taken this mindset that when you get scolded, when things go wrong, when things go badly for you, that's actually a tremendous blessing, because those are the opportunities to make the fastest progress, because there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of force in those negative experiences as well. And so using that in the correct way to perhaps humble yourself a little bit, or to make yourself a little bit more self-aware. There's so many positives you can take out of things not going the way you wanted them to. And
Fail-
so,
Failures
yeah,
are the pillars of success, as we
yeah,
say sometimes. So
yeah.
here's the second paragraph. I'll continue with that. Inner surrender transforms life into an infinite progress. It gives life the soulful assurance that life lives in God and God alone. So this kind of
Mm,
parallels what we just talked about, how it transforms life into infinite progress. So the surrender mindset is the mindset of progress, where this is the goal of surrender, to constantly make progress. So sometimes you're
yeah.
in the river of success and prosperity and everything's going positive, and sometimes you're in the river of adversity and, let's say, failure. But both these rivers are parallel to each other. They're flowing to the same ocean of progress.
Yeah, it also makes me think as well about the idea that once you take a particular type of mindset in your life, and so this idea that you're having faith in a divine plan or a divine hand guiding you in life, you start to see the experiences that you have in your life in a much deeper and more profound fashion, because you see them as being part of this far vaster and grander play that you're part of. So instead of seeing just an interaction you have as being completely ordinary, you start to see all of those interactions have information, they have wisdom, they have lessons for you to learn from them. And so having that mindset of surrender to the highest in the universe, then you're going to start looking for the guiding hand in all of the experiences you have in life. So I think that's going to make all of the experiences you have potential places for you to make progress as well. So very
Wonderful.
interesting.
Okay, we continue with the third paragraph by Sri Chinmoy's essay on surrender. Surrender is the wisdom that sees and becomes the truth. Surrender wishes nothing other than God. Surrender gets pure God. Nothing is as practical as surrender, for it knows the supreme secret that to offer itself integrally to God is to possess God absolutely. Surrender is the purest devotion that sees through the eye of intuition. Surrender is freedom, perpetual freedom, for it always stays with God, in God, and for God. So here it's the blending of surrender with the aspect of devotion. Devotion, I would say, is intense love of God, intense love for the divine. And surrender is more an intensified version of that devotion, where you completely surrender your own ego, your own limited self to your own to the higher to the highest within you, the unlimited self. And so it's basically changing the perspective from you being your own limited self and acting in the world and just being an island unto yourself, which is, you could say we surrender to that in our normal day-to-day life. We surrender to our whims. We surrender to our desires. And now we're just changing the perspective. So we decide to surrender to God within us. And then, you start to see this much larger perspective, this perspective of progress, of you being part of something bigger, a divine play. And what I love about this last paragraph is the sentence, surrender is the purest devotion that sees through the eye of intuition. So it's basically devotion mixed with intuition, or enhanced by intuition, because I feel when you surrender, that guiding hand speaks to us. It sometimes whispers very, very subtly. We get an inner inclination, a whisper about what we should do. And you could say intuition is synonymous with this inner voice. So, and that mixed with devotion. So the devotion aspect is this very, very intense love of the divine, and then getting the messages from the divine, and then you surrender. Then you say, okay, let thy will be done. Right? That is Sri Chinmoy spoke about that as being the highest prayer that you can offer, the prayer that Jesus taught us. Let thy will, not my will, but thine be done.
Beautiful. That was a wonderful synopsis of, and that paragraph itself is just so poetic and really tries to capture something transcendent, and that's the difficult thing as well. We've got to remember when you are talking about spiritual topics, is that just trying to find the words to capture the experience is like such a difficult thing. It is such a difficult thing to do. So Sri Chinmoy was such a master of creating this very poetic and very beautiful language for trying to capture that. But one thing I did think of when you were talking and from that paragraph is that Sri Chinmoy said something that was quite interesting. He said that surrender is of the physical, it is of the vital, and it's of the mental. So it's those parts of our being, so the lower parts of our being are the parts of our being that are surrendering. Because like you said, it's very easy for us to think that we're in charge of our own lives and we're living in the world and we're doing what we choose to do. But what we're doing, in fact, is that we've surrendered to the lower parts of ourselves, those three parts there, the physical, the vital, and the mental parts of our being. And so we're following their whims, we're following their desires, we're following their ideas and inspirations. And very often the highest parts of our being, which is our heart and our soul, we're completely ignoring those. And so there's an idea that some people might have that giving up some sense of control or surrendering some sense of control in their life, they would be losing something. But if you look at it in a very, very logical fashion, what you're going to be losing is giving up the control to the lowest parts of your being and instead putting that control into the highest parts of your being. And Sri Chinmoy talked about the heart. He said the heart surrenders to the divine or to God, but the soul doesn't need to, because the soul is already entirely in tune with the divine. So the soul instead is using the vision, it's oneness vision with the divine. So it's almost like we want those lower parts of our being to surrender to the highest part of our being, which is our soul. And I think that's much easier for people to deal with, because I think most Western people, because of the way we've been brought up and the culture we live in, we value our individuality so much. And so for so many of us, it's so difficult to give up the idea of giving any control to someone else besides ourselves. And so the idea of surrender, there's often, when people think of the idea of surrender, they think of the idea of a slave surrendering to the master, where you lose all of your will and you're just being ordered around in a fashion that's not, it's not your best interests are not being served in that type of surrender. It's the master's interests that are being served in that particular type of relationship. But if you can start to see that in true surrender, in true spiritual surrender, what we're giving up is we're giving up our or surrendering the control that we've already vested in the lowest parts of our being, and instead we're transferring that to the very highest part of our being, to our own soul, and we're going to try and follow the guidance and the guiding hand of our own soul. And I think that makes it much easier for many people to approach the idea of surrender.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's actually an image from the Indian spiritual scriptures about the relationship between those different elements of our being: heart, soul being the spiritual, the higher elements, and then body, vital, and mind being the lower elements. And it's this image of a chariot that is driven by a set of horses, and then on the chariot sits the charioteer. He's holding the reins, and in the chariot is the prince. And so in this analogy, the chariot is the body, and the charioteer is the heart. The prince inside the chariot is the soul. And so the soul, the goal of this chariot is to reach the palace of truth, the palace of the prince. And so the soul is whispering the directions to the palace of truth into the ear of the charioteer, the heart, who is then holding the reins. And the reins stand for the mind. And with the reins, he's controlling the horses, the life energy, which we call the vital. And then the horses are drawing the body, the chariot, towards the palace of truth. So in you could say in surrender, this is the image. Every element works together in harmony. Being the highest, being the soul knows the direction, knows the way to go, whispering these instructions into the ear of the heart translating them into an inspiration for the mind, the vital, and the body. But there's also an image that they give in the scriptures when things are not so harmonious. So let's say if we don't practice a spiritual life in our normal day-to-day ordinary life, the situation is a little different. And so in this image, let's say the more chaotic image, the charioteer has fallen asleep and the reins have slipped from his hands. And the horses have gone galloping in exactly the opposite direction. And to make things worse, the prince is bound and gagged inside the chariot. And so in this very chaotic image, we're going the wrong way. But then there's a way to get from this chaotic image into the harmonious image. And that way, they say, is to awaken the heart, which means we have to wake up the charioteer. He's fallen asleep. He's the one who's let the reins slip. And so if we awaken the charioteer, we wake him up and say, hey, wake up, be present. And he grabs the reins and, he controls the horses. And then he can even go into the chariot and release the prince and untie him. And then everything can go back to the harmonious situation where the prince is then released, and then, the heart can guide us to the right direction. So this is an analogy for, you could say, the spiritual awakening, where these members of our being, body, vital, and mind, which are very often quite unruly, they then fall in line. They align themselves properly, and then all the elements work together to guide us to truth and light.
Beautiful. So that should be the model that everyone should be working with now. They're trying to make sure that their charioteer is awake, the prince is ungagged, and they're getting good information about where they're actually going.
Maybe we need an analogy for this day and age, because a chariot it's very 19th century, but I mean, maybe now we would say a Tesla or something like that. But anyway.
Maybe it could be a self-driving Tesla. And you've got you've downloaded the wrong maps.
The wrong software. Exactly. Okay, let's go to the next paragraph. Then this is the last one for this section. And let me see if I get this right. Yeah. The eye of surrender does not see the face of the hostile forces. It always sees the face of God's compassion, protection, and divinity. The life of surrender divinely rings true. It is always filled with abiding inspiration, revealing aspiration, and transcending realization. So here it's, surrender there's an element of protection in it. So when we talk about the hostile forces, these are negative forces that are in the universe active. They're, well, you could say, the Christian idea of Satan or the devil or demons or demonic forces that are working against truth, that are trying to lower our consciousness, that are trying to inspire us to go the wrong way. And excuse me. And so when you surrender, there's a natural element of protection, that you are safe, you are guided by the divine, by God, and you're always inspired. There's always a sense of inspiration and aspiration and then realization in that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful finale to those four chapters there that you read out, and I think it's really nice for people to understand as well that when you start to surrender, what you're really doing at the most fundamental level is you're putting yourself in perfect harmony with the game in the way that the game is meant to be played.
Hmm.
So it's like if there's a coach for a team, or a director for a play, they've got the vision and they know what the structure should be. They know what the rules are. They know the way in which they want the game to be played or the production to be done. And so when you're stepping outside of your small limited self, which you've been used to using in the world and guiding yourself through all of the experiences that you've been having. And instead, you start to realize that there's someone who understands your life infinitely better than you yourself understand it. And that's very hard for people to believe, but I mean, for you and I, we both have experienced that. And I talked about it in one of the early episodes, that I would never have dreamed that I would end up working in a music store. That was the
Hmm.
furthest possible thing from my imagination. But now that that's what I find myself doing, I've realized over the years that I'm doing the exact right thing for my soul here. And the type of experiences I have and the way that I can share my good qualities with my customers and with the people and the community we have around that. If I hadn't discovered that, it would be my life would be so much worse. I'd be so much worse off without that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I read something yesterday about Sri Chinmoy when he talked about his brothers and sisters when they went to the ashram. So Sri Chinmoy was the youngest of seven children, and all his brothers and sisters were really bright. And so they were all destined to study, to get a degree, to go to university, and they had it all planned out. And so first with his oldest brother Ridai, he started to study. He got his BA, his bachelor's, and then he was then going on to his masters, and he was kind of destined to be a really great scholar and philosopher. He was very, very brilliant. He studied the Vedas in his when he was a teenager, but then he got, as Sri Chinmoy described it, as soon as he heard the name Sri Aurobindo, it was all over. Like, he immediately felt, I have to go, this is my guru, this is my master. And he dropped his studies and then went to Pondicherry, where Sri Aurobindo had his ashram, and went to study with Sri Aurobindo. And the same happened to all the brothers and sisters. One by one, they actually never got to study. They went to the ashram, they felt the inner call. And so all these plans that they had, the divine had other plans. So it's interesting that when you surrender, you may have some formulated plans in your head. Oh, this is going to be my path through life. But then if you truly surrender, the divine may have, or your soul may have, a completely different plan. And I think it's the same that you talked about, and I have the same experience. I'm now, I have my own Waffle House, and I also would never have expected myself to follow that path. And I was
no,
also
that wasn't on the cards when
it
you were
wasn't
going to
on the
be a famous
cards.
actor.
I was going to be an actor. I was going to study at university, then become an actor, this and that. But no, here I am, and totally happy and fulfilled in that way. And like you say, I also feel this is the right thing to do for me, for my soul.
Yeah, so I was thinking a little bit about surrender and the process and the experience of it, and why does it actually work? Like, why does it actually? Because the picture that we've painted at the moment is that by surrendering your life in some way to the highest possible power that you can connect with, that will radically transform your life. It will give you a new life in some way. It will give you new types of experiences, and it will put you in alignment with the world in a way that perhaps your life is out of alignment at the moment. And so I was thinking about what it does and why that happens. And so I came up
Because
with a few ideas.
I like that idea that you said, for something to be true, it has to work in a practical sense in the world. So the
Yeah,
same goes for surrender. If it has to be, if it's an idea that is true, it should also work if you put it to practice.
Yeah. So the first thing I realized in some ways that what we're surrendering is we're surrendering the parts of ourselves that are like the maladaptions that we have to reality. So we're giving up all of those ways that we're acting in the world that are actually not in harmony with reality. So all of us have had various traumas and experience, and all of us have had many past lifetimes in which we've built up a lot of, I think the word samskara, it's like the build-up of experiences, and it gives certain qualities or to your soul or to your manifestation, let's say. Let's not say your soul, but it gives you certain types of predilections when you come back here into the earth plane. And so all of us have certain ways of acting and certain, we could call them habits, we could call them obsessions, we could call them attachments, whatever you want to term them. But we have all of these particular ways that we think that we should live our life, and we think that this is how we should act in the world. And very often they're so deeply connected with who we think we are that we don't actually see them anymore. We don't see them at all. We may react very aggressively and hostilely, in very hostile fashion when people criticize us, or we may get really frustrated very easily, or we may find it very difficult to empathize with others, or there's an infinite variety of forms that these behaviors, these maladaptions to life have taken. But because we've lived with them for so long, we think of them as part of who we are. We think, oh, well, that's just how I am. I'm just a cranky sort of a guy, or, I've just got no patience. And so we've in some way already started to create this character for ourselves, which is very limited. And I always like to say, if you woke up tomorrow and you had no memories, if you did not remember anything about your past at all, any of the experiences you've had, anything you've done, your successes or your failures, if all of that was completely gone, starting tomorrow, how would you choose to live your life? And it would be very interesting for people to actually think about that, because say if you ask someone who thinks that they're a cranky person, or irritable, or easily frustrated, if you woke up again tomorrow and you forgot all of those things, would you choose to be an irritable person? Would you choose to be cantankerous? Would you choose to be highly critical or judgmental? I mean, it doesn't seem
Maybe
like
some Dutch people would maybe do that voluntarily, like the cantankerous
yeah.
Dutchman that you often joke about.
Yeah, I can definitely see a few Dutch people would take that just to cause a little bit of friction in the world.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of us, if we actually really truly looked at ourselves, we've got parts of ourselves that we just simply accept. Oh, well, that's who I am. Like that's how I've always been. But if we actually take a position that there is some higher guiding force in the universe, and we are intimately and infinitely connected to that force, why would we not try and radically transform ourselves, like all the way down to our our behaviors and our personality and all of the humanness of us as well. And so I think when we learn to surrender, what we're first of all trying to do is we're trying to let go of that attachment, that clinging onto of those parts of our being that are no longer actually of service to us.
And I
And
think that can be a very painful and confrontational process,
yeah,
because you're, like you say, you've lived with them for so long. So saying goodbye to them is actually not an easy task. And
no,
there's another beautiful analogy of the tiger in the cage. So this idea of you living with your samskaras, let's call it ignorance, like
yeah,
the umbrella term would be ignorance, limitations.
yeah,
And you've lived, this ignorance is like a tiger, and you've lived with this tiger your whole life. You're both in the same cage. And the tiger is like very tame. It's like it's not attacking you. It's not doing anything to harm you or threaten you. You've lived with it your whole life. But then when you want to escape the cage, and you start rattling the bars and you start to try and open the cage, then the tiger starts to growl. Then it looks at you and says, "Hey, where are you going?" And then when you actually open the door, it may actually jump at you. And that's the moment when your limitations, your attachments, then they become, they start to protest. They say, "Hey, wait a minute. Where are you going? You can't just leave us behind. You can't just transcend us." And I think many people who live the spiritual life they have to go through this period where they really confront their weaknesses and limitations, and be really, I mean, the solution is just to look the tiger in the eye and say, I'm leaving the cage, and then just leave the cage and shut the door. And there's definitely a choice. You have to be very conscious and use really your willpower, your soul's willpower, to say to these limitations, your time has come. I'm not living with you anymore. I'm going beyond you.
Yeah, and I mean, who wants to live with that tiger their whole life? I mean, come on. Like at some point, like it's going to get
Exactly.
smelly in the cage. It's like the
Yeah.
two of you together for all those years. It's just, it's not going to work out well in the long run. So
Yeah.
it's
There's a
better
whole
to get,
world out there waiting for you.
yeah, get it over with now, and don't prolong the agony. But you're very right, and the thing is, we do build up attachments to the ignorance inside our own nature. And so this is one of the great problems we have to solve. And what you were talking about reminded me of this great poem by Rumi, and it is, why do you remain in the prison cell when the door is open wide? And
Mm.
this talks to me about that attachment to the prison cell. And that talks to me, like, if we imagine all of the ignorance as like chains that have been holding us down and keeping us small and limited. And then at some point when we're ready to surrender those to the highest parts of ourselves, what actually starts to limit us is actually our fear of living without those chains. We've become so accustomed to them that even when they've been unlocked and the door of the cage, the door of the prison cell is actually wide open, you could just walk right out. You've become so comfortable with your own prison.
Yes.
And so,
It's it was I think Marianne Williamson said, we are more afraid of the light inside us than the darkness. We are more afraid of our greatness than of our limitations. And Nelson Mandela famously used these words in his inaugural speech when he became president of South Africa. But it's very true. We're more afraid of the divine, of the greatness that we have inside us, than because we've lived all our life, we're comfortable with our limitations. And so it's
yeah.
kind of like the fear of the unknown a little bit.
Yeah, and what they provide to us is a safety blanket, and they provide us always an excuse for why we've never been successful. So it's that idea of being remaining as a victim and victimhood, and not accepting reality and trying to transform it, but instead saying, well, I was born like this, and my father was a cranky Dutchman, and so of course I'm going to be a cranky Dutchman, and how could I do anything different? But you're right that it does take an inspiration. It does take a push of divine grace almost to allow us to. First of all, it's becoming aware of these things, and so I think that's one of the great powers that we gain through our spiritual practice, is we get the ability to self-reflect. We get the ability to watch ourselves in the world, and we start to actually over time become aware of the times and the ways that we're acting in a way that's actually no longer in harmony with who we see ourselves as. And so that's our own ignorance. We start to see our own ignorance, and for a long time, and for lifetimes, perhaps people have been in denial about their own ignorance. They just don't want to see it. You just keep it all under the covers, or brush it under the carpet.
Yeah.
But when it gets to a certain point in your spiritual life, you start to see these things, and you start to realize that you are acting out a life that's not yours. You're acting out sets of behaviors. You're acting out the tiger's behaviors, not your own behaviors. And you start to see that there's this disconnect, and this lack of integration between who you're experiencing yourself as and who you're acting out, the character you're acting out in the world. And so you need to get those two things to come back into alignment. You need to bring that alignment between your vision of yourself and who your deepening experience of self and the way you're expressing yourself in the world. So surrender is perhaps the most powerful way to go about that, because what you're doing is you're offering all of the parts of your being that are no longer serving you, all of the lowest parts of yourself, all of your ignorance, and you're offering it at the feet of the highest part of yourself. And you're saying to the highest part of yourself, transform me, like guide me, like transform the ways that I'm not acting in alignment with who I should be. And so that's a really powerful step to take in your life.
Yeah, and I think it's then if you make that choice, the secret is to always stick by that choice. So
Yeah.
sometimes we make the mistake of making that choice, and then the next week we make the other choice again. We go back to our limitations. Whereas if you found the secret door out of the cage, then by all means, always choose the way out. Like, don't go back
Yeah.
anymore to the choices you made before. If you found
Yeah.
a choice that serves you better, the secret really is to always make that choice. So if you've found that a daily spiritual practice is really good for you, is leading you, is giving you more freedom, is giving you better experiences, then by all means do that every day. Like, never go back and stop doing that. And
Yeah.
that's the secret to spiritual success. If you make a right choice, keep on making it.
Yeah, and I know Sri Chinmoy said a very similar thing, that often people will pray and meditate to have one of their undivine qualities taken away, maybe their jealousy or their insecurity, and then it's taken away, or it's they offer it to that highest part of themselves, but then the next week they decide that they want it back again, and
Yeah.
they're just really, I need it back. I can't live without it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes it's our unconscious part that is taking it back. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I feel I'm missing something. Oh yeah, this was it. This was my little teddy bear that I lived with for so long. But
Yeah.
yeah, it turns out to be a
So
tiger.
that for me is the first part of surrender, is the giving up of our ignorance of the lowest parts of ourself, our obsessions, our maladaptions to the world. The second part of the transformation that surrender provides is it transforms our self-centeredness into an expansive worldview. And that is a radically transformative experience, because there's a huge majority of people who are living their lives in the world, and in their world, they are the sovereign king. They are the center of the universe. So all of their thinking, all of their actions are all aimed towards, or perhaps not all of their actions, but the vast majority of their actions, thoughts, and beliefs are all based around trying to get themselves ahead. And
Yeah.
so, and it's not until you feel and experience what it feels like to live a life of service and self-giving that you realize how limited you were before when you were living a self-centered life. Because a self-centered life seems a very logical and reasonable way to go about life, because you're living in an infinitely complex universe. It doesn't seem like there's anyone else here who's going to look after you. I mean, your mum's going to be there for you, but she can't do everything.
Yeah.
So it seems like, there's dangers behind every corner. There's the potential for an infinite number of things to go wrong. So it seems a very logical thing to try and hold on to what you have as tightly as possible, and and try and keep yourself safe from the dangers of the world.
How do they say that? To take care of number one? Isn't that the
Yeah.
expression?
Yeah, and so that may seem completely reasonable, but the problem is with the experience of living that out is it's not fulfilling in any deep, profound level. So we talked last week on a podcast about there's an idea that the best possible life is a combination of all the best possible experiences that you can afford to have. And so that you should be trying to get as many resources as possible to have the highest quality of experiences you can have here on earth.
But we also concluded that that may not be a long-term, fruitful strategy.
No, exactly. And so that's the idea that we're talking about here, where you are focused entirely on trying to please yourself and trying to give yourself the best possible experiences, because you only know what you know, and you don't know the things that you don't know. And so you will be painting a picture of the world, what you think the best possible experiences are. And your picture will be profoundly inaccurate, because there's so much you don't know at this point. And so
Yes. And
that's
that's
the
where the quality of humility comes, right? I have to think
yeah,
of Socrates. Socrates, the Greek philosopher and
yes,
saint, said, "I know that I don't know, and by knowing that, I know a little bit more than everybody else." So
yes.
it's a real treasure to know that you are imperfect, that you miss certain parts of the whole worldview of reality. And so that's step number one: admitting that you have ignorance, that your view is not perfect, is not complete, right?
Yeah, and then that starts to open up the space for you to pay attention, and for you to be present to new and different opportunities to appear in your life. And that's when the universe can start reciprocating and playing a mutually fulfilling game with you. Because when you have already decided that these are the experiences that I want, that, I want to get my degree, and then I want this particular type of job, and then I want this particular type of house and car and holiday and all of these things, you're not leaving any room for the universe to guide you onto paths which would give you more interesting, more fulfilling, and more meaningful experiences. So you've already decided that you are the ultimate authority on the best possible life in the entire universe. And it just seems like a wildly foolish position to take. For me to say, hey, like, I know all the very best experiences, and I'm going to go and curate them all, and that's going to be the perfect life. And obviously, I will miss out on all of the most interesting things because
So
my
if
picture is
if you would
inaccurate.
take that very seriously, and if that would be true, then I would say all the rich people, they would be the happiest people because they have the
Exactly.
capacity to create all the experiences that they wanted. But
Yeah.
very often what we see is that the richest people are perhaps the most miserable people.
Yeah.
And so I knew a friend, or I knew somebody in one of my meditation classes who used to drive these very rich families in Switzerland in the winter holidays. He was their chauffeur, and he would drive these really rich ladies to these really expensive shops in Davos or St. Moritz, and they'd be shopping for tens of thousands of dollars. And they would collect these really fancy dresses. And he said these people were the most miserable people I ever met in my life. Like, they were never satisfied. They were very rude to the surface personnel, and they expected everybody to be at their beck and call. And when there was even a slightly thing not according to their wishes, they would like freak out. And so very interesting. If you actually practice that, you try to curate yourself all the best experiences, it will not make you happy. Definitely not in the long term.
No, and what will happen as well is all of your expectations will come in and ruin the potentiality for you to enjoy all of the experiences, because that's the difficult thing. It's interesting when you look at really expensive restaurants, they often get a lot more very scathing and tough reviews than a really cheap restaurant, because they're going there with really high expectations and they've spent a lot of money. They feel as though they're entitled to some outlandishly good experience, and so it's always going to fall below what they expected. Whereas if you go, I remember one of the restaurants in Christchurch, which was had one of the highest rankings and reviews of all the restaurants, was a small food truck. And it was simply because the expectations were very low. And so if you go to a food truck and you find that the food's like pretty good, you think, oh,
Yeah,
wow, this is amazing. Like, what a great place. It cost me,
I'll give them five
$10.
stars.
And,
Yeah.
got this great meal. So that's the difficult thing as well. And so for these very wealthy people, their expectations have been so skewed by their wealth and the availability of these experiences that they can no longer appreciate these experiences for what they are, and they're always instead looking for what is wrong with them. What is the
So let us not generalize too much. There are also wealthy people who are very, very, who can deal with their wealth in a very
yeah
responsible and just and fruitful manner, and who can be happy. It's not like you cannot be happy. But I do have to remember the famous quote from the Bible where it's more difficult for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to attain the kingdom of heaven. And
yeah
here, it's not a literal eye of the needle. The eye of the needle is a name for the small door next to the big city gates. So if a camel would go to a city and it was laden with these with goods to trade, then at some point the city gates would lock. At 6 o'clock or something for the night, the gates would lock. But there would be a small gate, and this gate was called the Eye of the Needle, but it was much smaller. And so for a camel laden with all these goods to pass through that small gate, it was possible, but it was really, really tough. They had to, unload all the bags. Then the camel had to be pushed through this little Eye of the Needle gate. And so, this is the idea of a rich person attaining to the kingdom of heaven, of course, being your soul's wealth, the inner wealth. It's possible, but it is actually more difficult than when you are not super wealthy, I think. It's just more challenging.
Yeah, and thank you so much. I actually didn't know the exact meaning of the eye of the
Hmm.
needle. So you have revealed something to me. So I'm already wiser than I was before we
Fantastic.
started
Yeah,
this
well,
episode.
somebody also explained that to me, and I thought, like, wow, that makes sense. I
Yeah,
never understood that saying before. Yeah,
that's a beautiful thing. So thank you for that. So
sure.
so we've got that next step is when we start to expand our experience of reality, and we are no longer focused entirely on ourselves, and we start to expand, and then we can start to actually connect and give generously to the world around us. And the amazing thing is when your focus goes from the self to the other, like from the self to the universe, you suddenly realize there's so many opportunities to be of service to the universe. The universe is constantly crying out for people who are aware, who are loving, who are kind, who are generous, who have something to offer to the world, because the world is, the game of life is so infinitely difficult, and there's so many people struggling with the basics of it, that there's always people who are needing something, and if you are someone who has something to offer to the world, you will always be incredibly valuable. And and it's like we talked about in last week's episode as well, that I think the philosophy in the new millennium is going to be that we get by giving. And so,
Yeah,
whatever it is that we need in the world or in our lives, that we're going to get that through giving that to the world and the people around us and the relationships we have and the situations we find ourselves in. And so, if you're looking for more love, more connection, more meaning, more purpose, more kindness and generosity, any of those things, they're to be found by giving the small amount that you feel that you have to the world. And as you give, you will get. As you give, you will receive that same thing. And it's those divine qualities, that it's not a zero sum game, as you've said. And
yeah,
the more
exactly.
love you have, the more love you give, the more love you find that you have. So
Perfect. Just want to pause it for 1 second. Hold on. And we're back. And so, anyway, I had to think of the famous saying by President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, who said, think not of what your country can do for you, but think of what you can do for your country. So this is the idea of giving, right? Of service. Service actually does make you happy in the long term. And it's not what your country can do for you. It's not like this demand or this expectation. Oh, the government has to take care of me. But instead feel like, what can I contribute to the world around me? What can I contribute to my country, to my community, to the world at large? That makes you happy in the long term.
yeah,
Service.
and that also puts the relationship in the right order, where you're doing good, and then you're feeling good, and
Mm,
you're not trying to feel good by hook or by crook, but instead you're actually taking good actions in the world and being of service, and from that you're feeling good. And so that's a really powerful thing. Okay, so the third aspect of surrender. So the first part was surrendering our ignorance and our
the
maladaption
maladaptation
to it.
to reality. Yeah.
Yep. Secondly, we are surrendering our self-centeredness, and we're giving that away. We're giving that
Yeah.
away to whoever wants it. And then
Exactly.
thirdly, this is the most interesting part, and this is a part that you touched on a little bit before. And I think in the third part of surrender, at the deepest level of surrender, we actually give up our own self-deception.
Our
And
own self-deception.
deception. And what I mean by that is all the ways that we're not really being authentic and truly looking at ourselves and our lives as they are. All the things that we're trying to hide from ourselves, all of the ways that, and perhaps where our intentions or our motivations are impure, perhaps our the way we deal with others, or the way we treat others is not living up to the standards that we would expect from ourselves. So it's all the ways that we're being insincere, and it's the things that we are hiding from ourselves. And so these are often very deep things, and very often this is like, these are all sequential. Let's say that they get harder as they go along, And so giving up some of your ignorance, like most people are quite happy to give up some of their ignorance because they know it hasn't made them happy. So they're quite relieved at some point to let go of some of that and to take the weight off for a while. And then most people are aware as well that they're perhaps more self-centered than they need to be. And so most people could get to that point. But when you get to the point where you're ready to give up your own self-deception, that is some tough things, because these are all the parts of yourself where you've acted in certain ways and you yourself have been shocked or disgusted by them. You yourself know that you've let yourself down terribly in some way. And so these are the things that you really keep really pushed really far down, because you yourself don't want to even accept or recognize that they are currently part of your nature. But
Maybe give some examples of behaviors like that. Like give some examples, some practical examples.
so, like, I would say, like, very often it's when we betray people. It's when we're treacherous, when we're like truly doing something that's truly nasty to someone else. But it's too hard for us to hold that picture inside our head and operate in the world. So instead, we do the really nasty thing, and then we just try and push it down, and we try and totally forget about it and never talk about it again. And so everyone knows they've done things. Yeah, it might be in a situation where you hear someone gossiping or talking about someone else, and you throw your own, your little bit of gossip and your little snide remarks in there. And you know what that's like if you've ever had the situation where you've been saying something about someone else and you've thought they're not there, and then you realize that they've overheard what you've said. And you know how absolutely mortifying it feels. You know you crossed a line, like, oh my God, I really shouldn't have said and done those things. And everyone's had experiences like that. And these are the self-denials or self-deceptions, I was calling them, where you've all of those things and all of those parts of you have been, because everyone has the potential to do terrible, terrible things. And it's very often we've just not been given the opportunity to do those things. That's why we haven't done some terrible things. And so,
well, it's often when you see, like, for instance, in a couple of years ago in London, there was these big people were plundering, right? There was this how do you call it? That's
looting.
The English word is coming. Looting, exactly.
Yes.
And so this mass looting appeared, and all of a sudden everybody was going into the shops and stealing these things. And so it's like, wow, I didn't know there were so many, thieves. But it's like when the social norms disappear, everybody can become a thief, like in a twinkling.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so
it's important to have integrity, I think. Like surrender also creates this feeling of integrity. Like it's beneath my dignity to do this kind of behavior. It's not aligned with my soul's deepest values.
Yeah, because Sri Chinmoy's talked about this beautiful idea of divine pride. And the idea of divine pride is you using pride, but it's in a very positive sense. And you would say to yourself, I am a divine child of the universe. Like, how could I act like this to someone else? Or how could I think this? Or how could I do this? Because in that moment, you're identifying with the very highest part of yourself. And then you're seeing those actions that maybe you've done in the past or you've been tempted to, and you think, they don't align with who I truly am in any way, shape, or form. So you just can completely put them aside. And so I think getting to this level of true authenticity with yourself, where you're not hiding anything from yourself, where you've taken the light down into the darkness and you've illumined it. And Sri Chinmoy's got a really cute analogy for the modern world. It's not using a chariot. He says, if you go into a dark room, you just need to bring an electrician and just put in one light bulb, and you turn on the one light bulb and the whole room is illumined. And I just love it because it's just so wonderfully simple. It's like, that's all you need to do. Like, that's the thing.
Shine that light in the dark corner. Lift up the rug, see what's there.
In the dark places, you just need to bring one light bulb and turn it on, and all the darkness disappears. And that is a profound
that you have in your room right now. It seems like you have one light bulb like that hanging there in your room. It's beautiful.
Yes. So I think for me that was how I tried to capture the idea of surrender. Is that there's different stages, and we're all on a journey of surrendering. And so I think almost everyone in the world has realized at some point that they've been unable to control their lives. And the thing is, if you think you could have absolute control over your life, it is just an absolute fallacy. There is no possible way living in this world that we live in that you can really control anything. So no matter how well you
No,
plan
exactly.
things and how
And
well you try and protect yourself.
yeah, and I also remember Sri Chinmoy explaining the concept of surrender. He said it's actually very simple. Just change the boss. So, right now our boss is our ego, is our limited
Mm,
way of seeing the world. So, and it's the same thing. Like we always surrender to something, and so even obeying the traffic rules, stopping for a red light, going for a green light, that is a form of surrender. We've accepted that there are certain rules in traffic, certain laws that we have to abide by, and then everything will go smoothly. Like if we ignore those things, there'd be constant collisions. And so the universe also has a set of laws. Like our higher self, our soul has a set of cosmic laws and cosmic rules that it abides by. And if we, through our spiritual practice, we start to become aware of these, we start to realize that there's these higher cosmic laws that are operating. And we can call that truth, we can call that divinity. And just we surrender to that. So we change the boss, we don't listen anymore to our own hedonistic or self-centered views or whims, but instead we put our soul in charge. We put that prince in the chariot. We start listening to that. That becomes our boss. And then surrender is easy in a sense. Like if you just say, okay, I'm changing the boss. I'm throwing out the limited self, the ego, and I'm putting my soul in charge. And that's basically the one thing that you have to do. But then make that choice again and again and again. Like don't go back to your old boss.
yeah, and so if we look at the different levels of the bosses that we can have, obviously, if we put all of our, if we listen only to the physical is always wanting to have food and then rest. It's like food and rest. Yes, like this is life. And so if you're someone who obeys that boss, like what is the outcome you get at the end of that journey? It's like you become obese and you've got zero energy. Like, you are the person sitting on the couch all day because everything is too difficult. And so that's if you fully surrendered to the physical self, the physical body as your Lord and Savior. That is the goal he will take you to. And so most people would say, okay, yeah, that's probably not what I want. So I need to bring some
Well,
discipline into the
it
body.
seems many people in the world are following that path and
Yeah,
are
they're
calling out
slipping
that.
down, they're falling
Yeah,
down into that level. And then if
yeah.
we go to the vital level, like the vital level is the energetic forces that drive us. And so, like one of the big ones is, searching for a partner and procreation. And so that is a huge one that, like, for so many people, they spend all of their time chasing after that. That's like their entire focus, not just outside of work, but also at work. This becomes your god and your goal, and so you spend all of your time focusing on that. And so most people would realize, okay, that's not going to bring me real fulfillment in the longest possible time as well. And then when we move to the mind, I think everyone's mind has a certain unique set of ideas and ideals imprinted in it. But very often, the game of the mind is the game of power. It's the game of the mind often has a real urge to have power over other people. That's often what I see. The mind loves to be right, and the mind loves to have power and power over other people. And both of those again, like, okay, if that's your ideal, that's your God, that's what you're going to focus on. It's like, really, that's going to make you happy in the longest. Is that even going to make you happy in your relationship or in your friendships or in your
Well,
small?
if that would work, then all the politicians would be the happiest people, and I don't think that's going to be the case if we look
Yeah,
around.
exactly. So what we're saying is that you can choose the aim of the game that you're playing, but there's a huge price to pay for each of those. Like each of those requires certain sorts of behaviors, it requires certain types of thinking, and you're going to get to a particular outcome. And you want to think, is that really where I want to put my time and energy going in those directions? And so when you start to practice the game of surrender, you're surrendering those lower forces to the highest part of you. And the highest part of you is crafting and creating a unique path for you through reality. Because if we think of the divine Leela, the divine play again, and the soul has the soul in its deepest level has oneness with the vision of the divine creator, so the divine um, conductor of the orchestra. And so it knows what your part is in some way, because that's the thing. Why do we so often have this feeling there's something, like I'm really looking for what I'm supposed to be doing here?
Something
It's
is
like
missing. I was
so
just
many
thinking
people
about that.
have that
Yes.
feeling.
Yes. I was just thinking
So
the same thing. Like, yeah, some people feel something is missing
yeah,
in my
so
life. And it's not that that thing is missing forever. You can find it.
yeah,
It's there.
and so yeah, that feeling like it feels like we can talk about it as the soul's mission, or the soul's journey, or the soul's your divine role in creation. Like you've got some particular part to play in this universe that that role will never be repeated again. So if you don't do a good job of it, like we're going to miss out on, like, this could be like best supporting actor in in the year
Yeah.
2025 version of humanity.
There's no
Like,
substitutes for that role. There's no substitutes.
no, so I think that's really cool for people to try and really embrace that idea that their role in the divine Leela, the divine play, is incredibly complicated. And it's incredibly important because each role within the play is equally important. And that's the cool thing, that each role within the drama is the center of the universe. So it's like Lord Indra's net. And so Lord Indra's net is the story of this net, and every joining between the two threads, there was a jewel. And each of those
Jewel. Yeah.
jewels,
Yeah.
the diamonds or whatever they were, they reflected every single other jewel in the entire net. And so this is what your life is like. You are the combination of all these divine threads, and you're this jewel at that point. And your role in the universe, no other soul can play that role apart from you. And your soul as well is connected to all of the other souls. So there's it's like the microcosm and the macrocosm. It's like as above, so below.
And didn't you have a wonderful story about that with one of the people that entered into your store at some point? Is that this story?
Yeah, so yeah, I've got a wonderful man who came into my store, but just once. And those are always the most interesting characters. And he wandered into my store one day, and as soon as I saw the gentleman, he was just his clothing choice was very nondescript, just a black t-shirt and black jeans. And he was in his 60s. He had like very tan skin and very white hair. And he started looking around the store, and I immediately realized there was something unique about his consciousness. And so I just was being open and present, just giving him my attention. And as he was looking around the store, we started chatting about this, that, and the other thing. And he at some point got on to talking a little bit about his musical background. And he just spontaneously came out and said, I had a period in my life where I owned and lived in a deconsecrated church in a very rural area. And every evening as the sun was setting, I would sit down at the church organ, and I would just wait there until Spirit came and played through me. And some of the music I played was the most beautiful music that has ever been manifested on the earth. And
You
I was
knew
like,
that.
I was like, wow, like that's really interesting. And the interesting correlation for us is that our teacher, Sri Chinmoy, he also loved playing the pipe organ in a very improvised and spontaneous fashion. And so that's what this gentleman was doing. And so I mentioned that. And he said to me, well, I've actually had a few experiences. And I said, yes, you've had a near-death experience.
You just plucked that out of the air when he
Yeah,
came
because
in.
the thing was, I had been really fascinated by near-death experiences. And I knew one thing that people often talked about is when they came back, they had an access to creativity in a way that they'd never had before. And so for him, from a very young age, he was incredibly just natural on musical instruments. So when he was a young boy, he got a saxophone, and he never got saxophone lessons. He just started playing the saxophone. And he said to me, I could really play that thing, man. And it's like, it was just such a great line. Yeah, I could really play that thing. And he told me, I said, oh, were you in any music groups? And he said, oh, once he joined a band and they were looking for a saxophone player. And so he turned up, And they said, okay, this is what we're going to play, and we'd like you to play a little bit here and a bit there and do this. And he said, okay. And so it was the rehearsal, and so they played through, and he did what they wanted, and he did it amazingly. And they thought, wow, this guy's fantastic. So they said, okay, great. So we'll take it from the top again. We'll do that. We'll have another run through. And the next time they did the run through, he did it kind of the same, but also a little bit different. And they said, oh, hey, like that was great as well, but like we want you to do it like you did the first time. Like we just stick with that. And he realized in that moment that like this wasn't going to work out for him.
Yeah.
And so he had two experiences, and perhaps I'll tell him both because they kind of link together. And so the first experience he had was when he was 3 years old. And so he was born into a family which had a lot of violence. It was a lot of drug use, alcohol. There was gang members. It was a very violent, dangerous place for a young
It was in New
child.
Zealand?
This was in New Zealand. I mean, you'll be shocked to hear that such things happen. So,
well, I've seen the movie Once Were Warriors, so
yeah,
I know that.
Yeah, so anyway, so at 3 years old, he got pneumonia, and he actually died at some point as a 3-year-old. And he said the experience of dying at that point was just like waking up from a bad dream, because here he was in this terrible situation full of just the most horrible experiences for a young child. And there was just no safety, no security, no stability, no sense of love. And suddenly he was plucked out of that, and it was said it was waking up from a nightmare was the experience. And so now he's the soul again, and he said the feeling was just so amazing and blissful after having been in this horrible, horrible situation. So his soul is now heading up, and he can see, looking up into the sky, he can see a golden light ahead of him. And so he starts heading up towards the golden light. And as he's getting closer and closer, he sees a feminine form coming from the light towards him. And so as she gets closer, he recognizes her, but he doesn't know exactly who she is. And often people say in near-death experiences, often it might be your mother or your grandmother or some relative or someone you've got a connection with will actually come and meet with you. So he had this real strong familiarity, but he didn't know exactly who she was. And in this moment, he started to become very concerned. He said, "Oh no, they're going to make me go back." So he said to her,
Was he a 3-year-old in that experience?
Yeah, he was a 3-year-old. Yeah, he was a 3-year-old child.
And also with the mind of a 3-year-old.
So he's having this experience, and he is having it as the soul. So it's like he is not just a 3-year-old anymore. He's got a more transcendent awareness. But he's still in some way connected to that body. And so he says, first of all, the first thing he says is, "You're not going to make me go back, are you?" And she said, "Oh, no, we're not going to make you do anything." She says, "But what we're going to do is we're going to give you a choice." And he said, "Oh, okay, a choice." And he said, "Well, if I don't go to the inner worlds now, is there something I will miss out on in the inner worlds?" And she said, "No,
So
no, no."
If I don't go back to
No,
Earth,
if he doesn't carry on, to the inner worlds, is there any special things there that he would miss out on? She said, no, there's nothing you'd miss out on. And he said, "Well, if I don't choose to go back to my earthly body, is there something I'll miss out on there?" And she said, no, there's nothing to miss. She said, "But what I can do is I can show you your incarnation. And from that, you can then decide. But if I show you your incarnation, every experience you could possibly have if you remained on Earth, you will not be able to remember any of it. So it'll be wiped from your memory." So he said, "Okay, please do show me my life." And he said to me, "You see, I'm a very visual fellow. So what I did was, instead of trying to remember anything, I created a picture in my mind which represented what I had seen and what I was shown." And he said, "I have now spent the last 60 years of my life spending countless hours staring at this picture inside my mind's eye." And I said, "Well,"
so he could remember the picture,
he can remember the picture, and he spent hours staring at this picture.
even though they obliviated him.
They removed all of his memories of what he saw, but they obviously, he put the beautiful painting, the picture, somewhere else. And so I said, "My friend, what was the picture?" And he said, "Well, if you stand back and look at it, it's like one of those very, very large canvases at the Louvre." So, the Louvre has those very, very large halls with a very large...
The Louvre in Paris, the famous museum. Yes.
And so these ones, those big ones, what are they like? 8, 9, 10 meters long and like 5 meters high. They're huge, huge pieces. And he says, if you look at it from far away, what it shows is it shows the universe, and it shows the progression of the universe, and it shows the universe is constantly moving and progressing towards union and oneness, which is perfection. So self-transcendence is perfection. Union and oneness is perfection. So that's what his amazing painting picture he's created is. But he says the interesting thing is if you zoom in closer, you'll realize it's not actually a painting. It's actually a tapestry. And the thing is with this tapestry, each of the threads is one individual soul's lives. And so this amazing picture that's been created is coming from all of the threads of all of the lives of the beings that are incarnating here on earth. And he says what's really important with each thread, with each soul's journey through life, is the points where it crosses over with another thread. So you have people you meet in your life, you have interactions, you have acquaintances. There's certain people in certain moments, though, that the coming together makes one of these junctions. It makes one of these points where the two threads will cross over. And so these points are incredibly important in the perfection of the universe. And so I said, so my friend, why did you decide to come back then? He said, well, I realized if I removed myself from the game, it would be the same as removing one of the threads from the tapestry. And so then it would take some time for the tapestry to reorganize itself, to rebuild all of the connections. And that would cause a delay in the perfection of the universe. And I said to my friend, how long do you think you not coming back would have delayed the perfection of the universe? And he said to me, at least 2 or 3 seconds. And I said, yes, this is a man who understands the importance of this game. Like, if you can expedite the perfection of the universe by 2 or 3 seconds, it's like you need to give everything you can to do that.
Absolutely. It's a no-brainer.
That is incredibly, incredibly valuable. Because the thing is, you've got to think 2 to 3 seconds for the infinite billions of souls here in the game. That's a lot of experience.
Well, last week we talked about the difference between 1 million seconds, which is 10 days, and 1 billion seconds, which is 31 years. So
yes.
Yeah, think of countless billions, and you're centuries and millennia away from perfection. And we want perfection. We don't want to delay that.
No. So he had one other story, which I think is actually important. That was the one that I did want to tell today because it really does connect us to surrender. So forgive me, my dear friend. I'll tell your second near-death experience. So the cool thing was
we can never have enough near-death experience stories.
The thing was, I love to tell stories in our meditation community in Christchurch. Every year on the anniversary of the Gundavaloka store, I tell some stories about events that have happened or things that have, nice moments or nice interactions that I've had with customers. And this happened maybe 1 or 2 weeks before our celebration for our anniversary that year. And I was thinking, oh gosh, I need some material. Like I need something to tell my friends in our meditation group about. And so this man, he was heaven sent, I think. And the thing was as well, I was really interested in near-death experiences at that time. And I thought to myself, I would really love to meet someone who's actually had one. So to have a man who's come in who's had 3 was off the. I didn't imagine that. That wasn't in my plan of the universe that I thought I was going to be experiencing.
Yeah. So you always get more than you if you don't expect and you surrender. You always get more than you ever could have imagined.
Yeah. So the second experience he had was when he was in his mid-20s, and he was a really good swimmer. And so he lived in the North Island, and he lived near a beach, and so he would go to the beach all the time with his friends and go swimming. And so. He sounded like he was quite a hippie-ish dude in those years. And so he had really long hair and he had a really good tan. He spent a lot of time hanging out at the beach with his friends. And one day he was at the beach with his friends and they were on the sand and he'd swum out. And he was a really, really strong swimmer. And on this day, though, something happened to him that suddenly he was out swimming quite far away from the beach, quite far out. And he suddenly started to feel really weak and he started to really struggle. And he at some point realized that he actually didn't have enough strength to actually get back to the beach. And he said that moment is just terrifying. Like when you really realize that you're out there in the deep water, no one can see you, and you're just running out of strength. You haven't got what you need to get back. And so he's on the surface and he's fighting and fighting just to keep his chin above the water. And at some point, he just realizes that it's a losing battle and there's nothing he could do. And he slips down and he starts sinking into the water. And he said that the feeling of you're resisting like crazy, you're fighting, fighting, fighting. So you're resisting the experience, resisting. And suddenly you get to the point where you can resist no longer and you accept the experience, you surrender it, and you drop down and you start sinking down into the water. And he said the amazing thing was he looked up and he could see the sun, coming through the water. And he was just like, my God, everything's just so incredibly beautiful. And then he felt a real sense of peace. He just felt a deep, deep sense of peace. So now he's below the surface of the water and he's sinking down. So in this moment, suddenly though, he remembered he needs to breathe. And so suddenly this started building up of the resistance. So the first level of resistance was when he was on the surface, fighting to stay on the surface. Now he's sinking down. And now this pressure, this incredible pressure is building up within him to take a breath. And he's fighting and fighting to hold it off. And your body intuitively knows that you don't want to take a big gulp of seawater, that is really the end of things. And so there's this incredible urge to fight against that. And so it's pressure, build. And suddenly at some point you just can't fight it anymore. And he takes a huge breath in and he fills his lungs with seawater. And then the amazing thing was, in that moment, he realized, oh yeah, I don't need air to breathe. And so he had changed from states of consciousness. He'd gone from the physical to the vital, and now he was on some more subtle level of consciousness. And so now he's sinking down, and he's just feeling like in total bliss. He's like, this is amazing. He's looking up, and he's looking towards the sun's rays, and he can see them coming through the water. And he just said it was just so incredibly beautiful. And in that moment, what he realized was all suffering is caused by resistance. All suffering is caused by resistance. And when we can accept reality and when we can surrender to life, all suffering disappears. And so he's sinking down in this blissful state. And then next thing he knows, he wasn't aware of it, but just as he was slipping down below the water, he'd stuck his arm up in the air, and one of his friends had just managed to see it. And so his friend had madly paddled out, swum out to where he last saw him, and then dived down as far as he could. And as I said, he had really, really long hair. And so his friend had swum down and just managed to grab hold of the end of his hair and wrap it around his hand. And he managed to yank the guy up and pull them up to the surface. So this gentleman was heading off in some blissful journey back to the inner worlds. And then next thing he knows, he's been pulled up to the surface. And his friend has got him and gives him a huge big squeeze, like on the chest to force out all the seawater from his lungs. And he comes back to life there on the surface. He looks around, he turns around, he sees his friend. Immediately what he does is he punches his friend in the face because he was so upset that his friend had dragged him back from the space he was in. And so obviously later on he could apologize to his friend.
Yeah.
There was something really magical about that realization he had, that there was and the experience was all about what we talked about in previous episodes as well, is tension and release. Like dying, there's this incredible tension, and then there's this incredible sense of release as you pass through to the other side. There's this incredible contraction and tightening and squeezing, and then there's this incredible expansion as you step through the experience.
Yeah, I'm sure the same goes with birth. I'm sure that there's a tension released there as well.
Yeah,
it's that birth and death are both like extreme and hard experiences for the soul.
Yeah. But this idea that he shared with me, that was something that I really took on, because so many moments of my life I could have caused myself suffering if I had chosen to resist the experience. And there's an infinite number of moments that this can happen in. It can be as simple as you're on public transport and there's a delay and you realize you're going to miss your next transit, or there's going to be some consequence of that. And how often do we get upset and annoyed and frustrated, and we want to blame someone, and we want to rage against the world. But in that moment, if we simply accept and surrender to the experience we're having, suddenly all of that goes away. And suddenly we're back to being here now, present in this moment, in this body, in this infinitely beautiful universe. And so our whole universe can be transformed simply through how we choose to deal with any conflict, how we choose to deal with any hardship, difficulty, any of these things we face on a regular basis. And so for me, that was another great reminder that so often we are fighting against ourselves and against the universe. And if we can accept our situation in the world, that's when we stop fighting with the universe outside of us. We stop fighting with
Mhm.
the external world. But it's if we don't surrender the lowest part to the highest part within us, we're always going to be fighting this battle inwardly. We're going to be resisting and struggling against between our higher nature and our lower nature. So surrender to me is the answer of how to transform the lowest into the highest. How do we transform the limited and the painful into the beautiful, into the transcendent? And Sri Chinmoy's writing at the very beginning. I've got a couple here
Hmm.
of aphorisms by Sri Chinmoy which really capture what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Surrender, surrender, surrender. All your dreams will come true. Surrender, surrender, surrender. You will be in the galaxy of delight. And this final one here. When I surrender my finite existence to the infinite consciousness, then my surrender is perfect. For my lowest is surrendering to my highest.
Yeah,
And
beautiful. I have something that I also looked up by Sri Chinmoy. This is from the book Surrender's Unlimited Power.
mm,
And if I read it out here, to understand the truest meaning of surrender, we have to remember that it must be constant and unconditional. The moment we ask the Supreme the significance of his will or the motive behind his action, there is no surrender. In true surrender, we do not ask what or why. Surrender means to jump into the sea of the unknown. Today, we find ourselves in the sea of the unknowable, tomorrow in the sea of the unknown, the day after tomorrow in the sea of the known. The following day, we have become the unknowable, the unknown, and the known. So I love that idea that we don't ask, what or why. So that's many times when, especially when we get a whisper or a command from the soul, it is not logical. It is not very often aligned with our reasoning mind. And I have a funny example of that. Um, I think I told this story in a previous episode, but I was, once I was invited for a friend's birthday party and I had made other plans. And so I was sitting in my room. I had booked tickets to go on a train to travel to Germany to an event. And I remember sitting in this chair in my room, and I was about to, my bags were packed. I had to go to the station to catch my train, but my body felt like it was made of lead. I could not move from the chair. My body, my whole existence did not want to go. It was such a visceral experience. And I thought, well, my reasoning mind then came to the fore, of course, and said, like, well, this is ridiculous. I bought the tickets. I made the appointments. Let's go. So I really had to drag myself from my chair and really drag myself into the train. Nothing untoward happened. Like I had a good weekend, but when I came back and I heard what an unbelievable party they had had, like my friends had had such an amazing party. They sometimes still talk about that. It's 15 years ago now. And all of a sudden I realized my soul just knew that I would get so much more joy by staying there. And it doesn't care if for this train journey and these tickets that I bought and this other appointment I made, for the soul, it's like, where can you get the most real joy? Where can you get the best, the most fulfilling experience spiritually? And it knew that I would get it from this birthday party of my friend. And so this is like, you can ask yourself, well, why, or what? But then the real art of life is to surrender, to make the decision, say, okay, I'm feeling this inner call. to not go and then to obey it. But that is a lifelong process. That is why surrender is such a difficult achievement, really. It's such a lofty achievement, to always listen to the voice of your soul.
And if I bring it back to the idea that if you look at the way the universe has been structured and the way it's so perfectly put together and the way it's just an absolute jaw-dropping work of art and brilliance and complexity, and the way everything functions in the world of nature and the world in the galactic sense on all of these different levels, everything is just so perfectly put together. And then if you think that there's a force creating that harmony and that structure and that beauty in the universe, and that it's like the conductor of the orchestra, or it's like even better, it's the director of the play. And the thing is, if you have to ask the director every scene, every moment, every act, or why is my character doing this? Why is my character going to do that? Why should I do this? Why should I do that? It'll become so monotonous and annoying for both the director and for yourself, because the thing is, you want to be surprised.
Yeah,
That's a big thing. You want to be surprised. That's why you go to the movies and you go watch all of this entertainment, because you want to be surprised. And so, in your own story of your life, you want to know exactly why everything has to happen like this now. That seems to me to really be such a short-sighted way of looking at reality, because you won't realize what you've lost, until much further down the line. And if you zoom out a little bit and think, okay, I'm going to have faith and I'm going to follow the guiding hand, and I'm going to trust that the right experiences will come my way. And perhaps it won't be now, perhaps it won't be in a year, or even maybe 10 years or maybe 20 years. You'll actually be able to look back and see how perfectly crafted the story was and the journey was. And that will be so much more richly rewarding than if you try to figure it out every step of the way. And it's like the person who's watching the film and then is critiquing it and predicting what all the characters are going to do, as
yeah,
the film is going. No one likes to watch a film with that person. So don't be
exactly.
that guy.
Well, as you know, I sometimes change my opinion of a movie that I see based on the critiques that I read afterwards, right? I mean, that is just, I saw a movie, it was entertaining. I think that was a pretty good movie. Then I read the review, and the review is scolding. And then I say, yeah, I agree with that reviewer. This was not really a good movie.
So that's amazing. So you have the ability to travel through time and to change your
Yeah,
experiences of the past. That is that
exactly.
is that is an amazing ability. You're one of the world's first true time travelers.
Time travelers. Yeah, exactly. But when you change the experience of the past, the reality has a way of just ignoring that and coming to the
Yeah,
same truth anyway. So I gave up that.
yeah.
Don't go that path. It's not really worth it.
Wonderful.
So,
Well,
do you have anything else to add when we are
I
kind of
think I
wrapping up,
think that's covered
coming to the end?
everything that I wanted to say, and I think you've said many beautiful things today as well.
Thank you. Wonderful. I think we had a really fruitful and beautiful discussion, and really, dove into the topic of surrender. And if I'm really, if I can share something from my, I pray in the morning. Every morning when I start my practice, I start with a prayer, and my first prayer, actually, my first prayer is for um, world peace, for this world to be peaceful and have and. But then my very next prayer is for unconditional surrender. So I really, I feel that if I can achieve unconditional surrender, that is the highest that I can aspire to. And I think for all the reasons that we talked about today, that if we have true surrender, life flows through us. We become the instrument of the divine. And I think we are all instruments in God's beautiful orchestra. And there's a Vajin shaped hole in that orchestra that you need to play that instrument. And there's an Abhinava shaped hole in that orchestra that I need to play that instrument. And surrender is the tool that makes us figure out which instrument we are and how the divine wants to play us. And if we read the score, and if we practice our instrument, and if we play that divine melody, then I think our life is completely fruitful and fulfilling.
Totally agree. Well said.
Nice. Thank you so much. And well, we'll see, dear listeners, if you joined us this far, thank you for watching and listening. consider subscribing to our podcast, leave a review, or tell a friend. We're all very happy to have you along for this journey, and we'll see you again next week.
Until then.